Well, thanks for having me. Excited to be back. I'm Laura. I graduated from Harris in 2017, and we'll give you a quick overview of my career path from when I did my undergrad to the different jobs I had to where I'm now. And I will probably keep that hopefully rather short so that we have a lot of time for questions and discussion. Cool. So I am German. I studied in Germany at the University of Mannheim, did a bachelor in economics, spent one semester in Spain at the Universidad Carlos III in Madrid. That was a 3-year bachelor degree, and it was the first year where the European higher education system was harmonized so that everybody would graduate with a bachelor. Before, every country had their own higher ed system, so nobody really knew what do these bachelors know, what jobs can they take, and I was pretty sure I wanted to work right after my bachelor degree just to figure out what's out there, what can you do, and the interest in kind of climate topics came up through a course that I took that would explain the EU emissions trading scheme. Which I found super interesting from a perspective of how do we internalize this externality, how do we make sure we reduce emissions, but we do this with some mechanisms that are efficient and that get companies to do what otherwise they wouldn't do. And so that led me to my first relevant internship. I had interned with like banks and insurances before and done like summer jobs, but nothing really that excited me. And so during my last semester in Mannheim, I went to a sustainability workshop, and one person from the WWF nonprofit organization, which is pretty big in Europe, spoke, and he was just so enthusiastically talking about his work that I started looking into nonprofit work. And that's how I found Carbon Disclosure Project, or now just CDP. And they had just opened an office in Berlin, so I just reached out to them and sure enough got an internship for a couple of months. I don't know if people know CDP. I hear that, okay, a few heads are shaking. Like back then, nobody knew that organization. It was 50 people overall. They were headquartered, ours still headquartered in London. And I was like number 2 in Berlin, like super small office. We were attached to the WWF, Worldwide Fund for Nature offices, and so I sat with their climate team, and it was just me, and my boss was in Munich, and then the rest of the organization was in London. So it was remote before remote was even a thing, and I thought I would stay there for 4 months, maybe 6 months, then do another internship, then apply for master degrees, and then they offered me a full-time position, and I declined it at first because I didn't want to get like stuck. I had the feeling I need to explore more and wasn't sure, do I want to stay here? And then my boss at the time convinced me to stay and said, hey, this is really a cool opportunity to learn and be part of something that grows. So I stayed, and in the end I stayed for 6 years. I really started enjoying it. It had so many opportunities to learn about the industry, because we engaged with all the major companies in the German-speaking world of Europe, all the publicly listed companies, the institutional investors like banks, insurances. They send a letter, or CDP sends a letter on behalf of those institutional investors to large companies that says, hey, your financial investors want information on your carbon emissions. Please disclose this. So you have really this financial lever, and companies do. And fill out this questionnaire on an annual basis, where the emissions come from, what the sources are, what the emissions are per year, and how they want to reduce it. And I really enjoyed that work because it was exactly that space between, moving something that supports sustainable economics, but through the private sector. And from this NGO that would talk to all of them. Those are some pictures. Lived in Berlin, obviously, for those 6 years, and we started those like rankings, like rate the companies by their disclosure, how much information would they publish, and also their performance, like how much would they reduce over time, what initiatives would they come up with. So we had those big annual conferences where we then awarded like the leaders, and it was remarkable for me to see how like those large companies get super excited when they get an award, and that this just being recognized for your work and for your progress is super important also in the corporate world, right? Because then they can show that to their board and say, hey, this is really important, and it gives us publicity, and it's not just this niche topic that we need to reduce emissions, which was really tough. This was in 2009 to 15 when I was there, and during my first 2 years, like we would call up companies and remind them, like, hey, are you reporting this year? And I would get shouted at. I remember a lady from a porcelain company literally shouting at me why on earth she was supposed to spend time on this. She had more important things to do. And so now fast forward, like that environment has changed completely, right? It's much more, there's much more awareness that like emissions are important and industry has to play their role. So while I really enjoyed that, after 6 years, I always knew I wanted to go back to school. And after 6 years, I figured, okay, it's time to look for something new. That was right before I think it was COP15 in Paris. So it was exciting times. The Science-Based Targets Initiative has just formed, like how companies can formulate emission reduction targets that are in line with like science. And we were part of that, but it was just time for me to do something new. So that brought me here. I applied for various master degrees across the US, in Europe. I wanted to do something that builds on my economics degree, but wasn't too academic. So I knew I wouldn't want to do just economics, and public policy was a nice kind of in between, which covered also other topics. I wasn't so sure do I really want to stay in this climate change world or not. And the big questions that public policy deals with, right, that are more societal and focusing on externalities, everything that the state has to engage with, but that's not necessarily meaning you work for a government entity. And I like that, like Harris has this flexible coursework where I didn't need to define in the very beginning what I would do after, right? I could have chosen to then go into like migration topics or educational policy, whatever. I like that open mind going into this degree. And I also liked, I just spoke about this with someone here, that in the US it's more common that people move into the master degree with some work experience. And given the whole change in the higher ed system in Europe, that wasn't so common yet. People would mostly just go straight from the undergrad into a master's. And I wanted to leverage like the network, talking to other people who also had worked in various fields. And that seemed a good occasion here. Also got a stipend, which obviously helped. And it was a great city, so everything kind of lined up. And that's how I ended up here. In my summer, between the first and second master year, I went to Washington, D.C. and worked for the International Finance Corporation. They had a climate policy team that at the time worked on a project for the G20 on green finance and what green finance is, what definitions exist already, how to quantify the supply and demand for green finance. And it was this vague term that first we tried to understand what industries have classifications or quantifications to even understand that term. And so I did a lot of research on, the transportation sector, the real estate sector, where you have certain, EVs obviously are green, and the real estate, you have certain, like the LEED certification, like buildings that get certified for efficiency. But in other industries, there was nothing. So we tried to understand, is there any, in the financial system, anything that we could use to quantify investments? And in the end, we came up with a suggestion for the industry, for policymakers. I ended up working with them for my entire second year at Harris, kind of finishing that work, which was really cool because in the end, this report came out of it that then triggered further discussions among the G20 and like high levels. And it was really rewarding to be part of something that then, you know, I had something in my hands that I could show, like, this is what I contributed to. I don't know where that led in the end. But the idea was that the use of proceed, which is kind of a tag in the financial world, what that money is used for, could be something where you could add like a, you know, green finance certificate or something like that. Yeah, that was my experience in the international organizations world. I really enjoyed the leverage you have at these organizations because you call like Bloomberg to get some data and they immediately talk to you, right? It's anybody who you talk to. When you call them from a World Bank, NCT, it opens doors, and that was really cool to see how that network is super broad. And then the question came up, what do I want to do after my degree here? And I decided to go a different route and explore the private sector. I wanted to see what that's like after NGO, international organizations. I applied to roles at the ICC actually. IFC. I applied to roles at EPIC. And then I decided to go for this role at an economic consulting firm. Why? Because it really gave me the opportunity to learn to dive deep into the energy markets, like how do they work, like for real, in terms of, you know, supply and demand matching, price formulation, and I could also apply various skills like I learned at Harris. That firm, London Economics International, did a lot of market modeling, price simulation. So I worked on projects, these non-wise alternatives, where utilities have to go through a study where they compare the cost benefits of building a new transmission line versus having local power supply solutions like backup power, reciprocating engines that usually run on gas or diesel, local renewables, right, solar, battery, storage combinations. So we did some of that cost-benefit assessment, a lot of energy market modeling. I was responsible for the Alberta power market in Canada, and they have an energy-only market. So all the suppliers just bid into the day-ahead and real-time energy market at what price they would supply. And they were just considering when was that, 2017, 18, to introduce a capacity market where generators get rewarded or paid for just being available to cover some of their costs and remove some of that uncertainty. Do they get enough revenues? And so we simulated the costs of both of these systems, just an energy-only market versus having an additional capacity market, what that would mean for the overall system costs, and for one utility in particular that was considering, do we convert our coal plants to gas? Is that investment worth it, given how they would run and make revenues in the future markets? That's where I learned a ton about like electricity markets and how the whole system works. And then it also helped the collaborator understand how they could bid more strategically into the energy market to increase their revenues. And there was a point in time where I thought, that's not really cool. I don't want to help coal companies earn more money. And I started looking for other opportunities. And that's when I found RWE, where I work now. It's a German-based utility and independent power producer. Here in the US, we only do renewables. So we develop, own, and operate solar, wind, and storage facilities. So it brought me back to one of my passion of reducing emissions. It also brought me closer to like the real implementation of my work. I really like to see now that whatever I do eventually leads to like a new solar park being built, versus having a cool report, but then you don't really know what happens with it, what implications come after. And kind of a side note, which really was coincidence, it's nice that, that I have that tie again, that the headquarters in Germany, and I can combine some travel sometimes, when I visit family or have to go for work. That's kind of a nice additional benefit. And when I joined the commercial analysis group, which was kind of a nice segue from this modeling work into the commercial team that also looks into what do future power prices look like, what would our future solar and wind and battery assets, what would they earn, is it worth the investment, where do we have incentives, and the states have renewable portfolio standards, so there will be a demand for new renewable plants, like kind of understanding what are the drivers for us to enter, develop a project in like Arizona or Ohio or wherever it may be. And I really enjoyed this combination of using my energy market and quantitative work to then think a little more strategically, what does that mean now for a company that really builds those generating facilities? So that let me move into the strategy team, actually take the lead of the US strategy team here, and work much more on what are our growth targets, on what technology should be focused going forward. And finally, that brought me to my current position, because 2 years ago the question came up, well, there's this whole clean hydrogen topic. What does that mean? What is that? We need to assess that. So that was then a strategy project over a couple of months, understanding what is clean hydrogen, what is green hydrogen, how does it relate to RWE's work. And out of that, the decision was made that it is a growth market and we want to enter it. I will explain a bit more how all of that works. And suddenly there was the proposal, well, do you want to go implement it and just start this new team? At that point, I was in my strategy role for a year and a half and wasn't really ready yet to move on. I really liked my work, like being involved in all sorts of different technologies and topics across the company, supported a lot of mergers and acquisition work. But then I considered it and I thought, well, it's such a new and exciting topic and there's so much to learn and I can help build it. So I went for it. And here we are. I took this position last summer. So it's almost a year now, and super fun, a lot of open questions, a lot of learnings. But I'm really enjoying it because it's a combination of applying what I know, merging it with a lot of new things I learn, and both thinking, like using my quantitative thinking, but also strategic aspect of working with a lot of other teams and trying to understand what do the engineers think, what does the legal team think, like how does it all come together. And I think kind of I found my place now where, for the time being, where I can use what I'm good at and what I really enjoy. And I have a couple of slides on that work, and then we can move into discussion. So who knows what green hydrogen is? Okay, cool. A few. Great. So hydrogen is a gas, right? It's the first element in the periodic table. Very light, no smell, you don't see it, very flammable, it burns at high temperatures. How is it produced and how is it used? It's the traditional, it occurs naturally, but it's used in the chemical world, and therefore it's produced through a process that burns natural gas called steam methane reforming, separates out the hydrogen, and as a byproduct you have carbon emissions. Now that's the whole problem down there, that we want to reduce those emissions. There is a production path that's called blue hydrogen, which is the exact same way, just that that hydrogen that currently is just vented in the air gets like captured, it's on a pipeline anyway, and stored in the ground. So you add a carbon capture and storage unit, reduces the emission by a lot. You end up with like a fourth of the emissions of the traditional way, but doesn't eliminate emissions. You still have, you know, the natural gas that you extract from the ground to begin with. You always have some leakage. So the third way is green hydrogen, totally different production path, where we use renewable energy as a power supply from solar or wind farms to power an electrolyzer, which is a facility that separates water into hydrogen and oxygen. And so in very simplistic terms, it's like a box with a membrane in the middle, and through power, it separates the water intake into hydrogen and oxygen molecules. And the oxygen, it's just can get vented, like we breathe it every day. You could use it, like some industries use it as an intake, but the market isn't very big. And that process has like zero emissions in the hydrogen production path. Obviously, you have some emissions in the upstream supply chain of renewables, right? We pour concrete, we have steel in the ground. But overall, it's like an emissions-free production path to get to hydrogen. You end up with the same molecule. And that molecule can be used in various different ways. So if you think about what my company covers is like solar and wind production, electrolysis to produce green hydrogen with that renewable energy and water. You get O2, so the oxygen that just goes in the air. Now, what can you do with the hydrogen? You can use it in various different ways. Chemical industry uses it already today, for example, for ammonia production, which is used in fertilizers. It's used by the chemical industry to produce those nitriles, rubber gloves, right? The blue or gray gloves you see at airports and on hospitals. It's used in refineries and like heavy industry. We can combine it with other elements to make other products, right? So if you mix hydrogen with nitrogen, you get ammonia. Again, if we replace that hydrogen production path from gray to green, we can make that ammonia product carbon-free. Or if you mix hydrogen with CO2, you get methanol, which is a chemical that is also used in various different ways. And again, it's called e-methanol or green methanol, and again, it's a cleaner product. It's used in like the steel industry and like chemicals. It can go in like aviation shipping fuel as like so-called sustainable aviation fuels or sustainable shipping fuels to move away from the very carbon-intensive fuels that burn today. Those are industries that are less experienced or less that are currently not using any low carbon product. So like we have those industries that use hydrogen today, which could replace green with gray with green. And then we have industries that could use this product that are not today using it. Challenge is green hydrogen is more expensive than gray hydrogen. So who pays for it? There's a tax credit. That's like the big incentive here in the US right now under the IRA. There's a clean hydrogen tax credit. So for blue hydrogen and green hydrogen, it's by emission intensity. So that's what we are pursuing. This is a rendition of how a hydrogen electrolysis production site could look like. You need water, right? So you have water as a feedstock. You have some wastewater, which basically just has a concentration of minerals in it, but nothing toxic. You don't need that much land. You need a lot of electricity, about twice the amount of electricity for the amount of electrolyzer capacity you have. The key challenges are that that production path is new. Electrolysis is not a new technology, but to scale it up is new, and to pair it with renewable power is new. So the three elements that we are pursuing now is where do we find locations where we get renewable power, we have water access, and we have offtake, somebody who wants to buy and use it, which is challenging because there's no infrastructure, there's no power grid where you just like feed it in. So we have to be close to that chemical facility that wants to use it, or the transportation hub where fuel cell vehicles get fueled with hydrogen. So yeah, that's where we are. What do I do outside of work? I just wanted to share here that obviously work is important, but there's a lot of other things. I actually met my husband at Harris. Oh, wow. Yeah. I do a lot of sports. I like weightlifting. I go running. That's a Harris friend I ran 2 marathons with. We got married here on campus, actually. Yeah, it was one of those stories where the consulting firm I worked with applied for my H-1B visa, which was great. Back then it was a 1-year STEM degree, so risky for employers. No, it was not a STEM. It was a 1-year OPT for the internationals here. Went through the lottery, then got a request for further evidence, which means you have to argue why did they hire you as a foreigner, not an American. And at the time, my company, I had a colleague who was declined his extension of his visa and then had to leave the country. So my now husband and I were thinking, okay, what options do we have, right? Do we go to Canada where that company had an office and visas are easier? Do we go to Europe, but then he would have the same problem, he's American. So then we said, well, okay, then let's just get married now rather than in 2 years. Organized a little party within 2 weeks and got married over there on campus. It was a great party. And yeah, I gave birth to our son 2 years ago. He just turned 2 months ago, and obviously he's a big part of my life now. He'll actually come pick me up with my husband later. And it's so life is busy, but I think everything comes in phases, and it's fun. I was thinking, what can I share with you? A few learnings along the way. It may look like a straight path. It's not. Like, I had literally no idea when I arrived here, do I want to work in energy and climate, or do I want to do something totally different? I wasn't so happy about my internship at the IFC because I thought it was too close to what I did before. And then I realized I really like that work over time, and I really want to stay in that field. But I questioned it for a while. Choose coursework that you really think challenges you to learn new things, but also that you just find exciting. I took a class on female philosophy at the law school. I took a class on genocide at the social science, institute school? Yeah. I took many classes at Booth, at Harris, at the Geoscience Institute on energy topics. But I thought it's really cool to have the opportunity to venture out and do something that's it may have nothing to do with your career, but you still learn something that otherwise you wouldn't learn, and it just enriches you. Over time, I realized it's super important that you do what you're passionate about. And everything is a phase, right? You can learn something for a while and benefit from that, but if you realize that's not what you're excited about, then go look for something new, because I'm really of the opinion that you deliver your best work product when you are excited and enthusiastic about what you do, in terms of the content and the topic, but also the type of work, right? I appreciate the modeling work I've done. I don't want to be a full-time modeler. And it was a good time, but I'm really happy where I am now that I use that knowledge, but it's much more strategic, and it has many other elements than just that quantitative work. Yeah, and sometimes you also have to suffer, right? Be that for a class where you have to complete a homework until the middle of the night, or a job where you go through a difficult time. It's a phase, and for myself, in hindsight, I say know your limits, know when it's important to push through it, and when it's time to look for something else, and you don't have to prove something to yourself once you realized that's not really what I want to do. Yeah, I think that's it. So, open. Yeah.
You spoke about the energy efficiency for the green and blue hydrogen. I just wanted to ask about the cost difference between both of them, and irrespective of the IRA, and also if you can shed some light on the 111 initiative of the Department of Energy, like they want to reduce the cost of hydrogen to $1 for 1 kilogram.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, they want to. I think they call it the hydrogen earth shot to reduce the cost of hydrogen to $1 a kilogram within this decade, which is challenging. The tax credit is $3 per kilogram, so it's decent. The price of like the traditional gray hydrogen today is between $1 and $2, closer to $1 probably. But even with the tax credit, currently we don't get there with green hydrogen. There's a range of, yes, you can make it to $2 to no, it'll be $10. It really depends on various different assumptions. Right now, energy prices are high, and just the electricity prices alone make 70% of the price for hydrogen in the end. The rest is like capex for the electrolyzer plant and then like some other smaller items. Blue is expected to be cheaper than green right now. For the industry who currently produces hydrogen, that's a natural path to say we now add a carbon capture and storage to our existing production facility. The threshold is, or the challenge is that they have to have the geologic conditions to do so. You need a salt dome or some underground condition that allows you to store gas forever underground. And the Gulf Coast has those conditions. So there's a lot of exploration by the oil and gas industry to do that. Right now, gray is the cheapest, blue follows, then green. And the tax credit rules specify how what qualifies as green. So the electrolyzer can only operate when the renewables actually produce, which is a big constraint, right? Because sun is only there during the day, wind doesn't always blow. But I think the reason for those rules is that we actually make sure we do reduce emissions and we don't run the electrolyzer and then the coal plant next door has to produce more electricity. The rules aren't finalized yet, so we'll see when the Treasury issues them. Yeah.
Hi, Laura. I'm finally a policy student with Harris as well. Thank you so much for taking out the time to come speak with all of us, especially those of you from Harris who have really turned out, grabbing up a pint of water, seeing yourself at the crossroad of now transitioning into full-time positions. So it's always valuable to pick from other people's pearls of wisdom. My question is that hydrogen is so new. So what are the challenges that you feel are there when it comes to scaling up hydrogen tech for mainstream energy use? And what specifically is RWE doing to tackle those challenges?
Yeah. So we look at it as we bring the renewable energy, which is critical. We have a trading desk that can ensure we combine the right solar and wind assets to produce the power for the electrolyzer. That doesn't have to be directly connected. So like this can be some virtual trading around that. They also trade commodities like in the future hydrogen, ammonia, like they don't only trade power. So that's helpful because they come in at the back end of the value chain. We need to find the right partners, right? Because we would not be the ones using hydrogen. So we work with like some of those industries that do use it today or consider using it tomorrow. We engage with like sustainable aviation fuel producers, with like ammonia producers, with the transportation industry. So transportation, hydrogen is not energy efficient. It's not a good use for cars, like passenger vehicles, but it could be a very valuable option for long distance trucking, for example. because the batteries would be very heavy, and so that could then become an efficient solution. So we're talking to various other companies to understand what their plan is, what the timeline is, when and where they would need the hydrogen, and we try to partner and develop ideas together. It is challenging because you're trying to create a market that doesn't exist yet, right? So there's a lot of back and forth and adjustments along the way.
I came up a little bit late, so forgive me, but it sounds like, if I'm gathering correctly from your background, it started off in kind of this econ and policy space up through your time at Harris. And then as you kind of entered the finance space, it sounds like you did a lot of like on-the-job learning about the kind of like more technical aspects of like climate science. I guess could you talk to me a little bit more about what that part of the learning on the job was like, and even as you kind of like spoke with employers and stuff, like how did you kind of, you know, let them know that you had the skills you needed and that you were just like ready to learn like more aspects.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. I think when you know what you want to do, it's very valuable to like think about what skills do I need to promote myself, right? To be like marketable for those positions, especially out of school when you don't have a lot of like work experience yet. When you don't, I think it's like the main element is, are you excited and have you prepared for an interview, or as you reach out, explain to people why are you interested in that particular job and how do your skills align, right? Like you can have a lot of like technical skills that you can learn almost anything on the job, in my view, right? But you don't learn the coding on the job. If you want to apply that, but you can then like do some research on like the companies you're interested in and reach out to people and kind of try to establish the link in those conversations. When I started the internship at CDP, I mean, I'd taken one class on like emissions and, you know, the economics of like low carbon like emission certificates, RECs, and the emissions market and all of that. And that's what I spoke about in the interview, like, even though that was, you know, like one semester. And I asked questions. And I think you need to make sure that you have an engaging conversation and people see that you really mean it and you thought a bit about like the business that you're applying or the institution, whatever it is. In the end, when I now hire, especially junior positions where it's less relevant what they have done before or in what sector they have worked, what experience they bring, like, that's it, right? It's what skills do they bring, are they passionate about it, and what, with this combination, what are the capabilities, what could they learn? And like actually Jer is here, who just joined my team in January, at the beginning of the year. Like he joined out of his master degree at Georgia Tech and was an intern in my strategy team last summer. And, you know, also had no hydrogen experience before. I mean, I had none, right? I just kind of, the path led me there. So like you have to show that you're smart and enthusiastic about the topic. And I know that's not easy to do. But in the end, that's what people look for, right? Like, how do you distinguish? You can't distinguish resumes much among like more junior people. So then it really becomes a question of personality and enthusiasm. Like, how do I think they can learn quickly, and do they have some skills that align with what we need? Yeah.
You mentioned briefly talking about green hydrogen now upstream. It's still not in the stuff activity. I'm curious if you've looked at maybe RWE or even the whole industry. Have you seen efforts to make the upstream part of like for manufacturing more clean, or is it still quite like in
Yeah. So I will correct it a bit. I don't think the upstream is very dirty. It's overall, it's clean energy. But yes, there are initiatives around a green steel, for example. How do we produce steel that's emissions free? It's very energy intensive to produce steel. So they're considering totally different production pathways that I don't know in detail, but they exist. And we are engaged with our suppliers in like understanding, like, could we procure like a low emission steel for our like wind turbines or the solar panels. There is an initiative around recyclable blades, right? The blades and they are right now really hard to recycle because it's like the material of the blades needs to be super durable to like run for 25, 30 years, like turn in all wind and weather. So it's hard to separate those like materials that are basically glued together. And there are new initiatives by those like wind turbine producers to engage in initiatives. How can we make this with the same quality, but such that we can take it apart later and recycle? Solar panels is just starting, honestly, because it's the first generation of solar panels. Like solar really just became big over the last 5 years. So like most solar plants are still in operation and will be able to produce for the next 20, 30 years. But there is initiatives already. What do we do with the panels later? Can we recycle the panels, and is there a second life, etc.? So there's a lot going on, which I think also gained a lot of traction over the last 2 years, probably. Understanding like, what's our product, but what's like upfront in the upstream supply chain. Yeah, in the back.
What are your thoughts and RWE's thoughts on annual versus hourly matching for like hydrogen production? Because I know there are issues in the industry right now.
Yeah. Okay, so you're deep into it. I think from an emission reduction perspective, hourly matching is better because it really ensures that we produce hydrogen when the renewables produce. It is much more complex, obviously. There's no tracking system right now where like the renewable energy credits are an annual product, right, by megawatt hour production and not on an hourly basis. So it's hard to think about how do we actually do this, once the plants are operating and track and make sure we can ramp up and down as the renewables produce or not. It makes it more expensive. But I think it's the right ambition. Let's see if the implementation works as planned. There's probably a longer phase in to make that all work. Yeah.
With the water intake of green hydrogen, how do you make sure that's sustainable and does not deplete the water supply that's getting it from?
Yeah, big question, obviously. So where do we get the water from? What type of water do we use? We can use any type of water source. So it can go from potable municipal water to brackish and salt water or industrial wastewater. We have to purify it anyway. So it just becomes a bigger process of purifying it if it's not just, municipal water out of the pipeline. But overall, the costs for that purification are like a percentage of the total hydrogen costs. So we try to go to places where there's no water shortage and where we can tap into the basically most dirty water source that is not in competition with other use cases. It's a big topic, obviously, depending on where in the US you are.
In terms of citing challenges of building on the water being one factor to consider, how do you guys think, and maybe like RWE holistically across other business units, the decision to site closer to the end customer, like you're talking about a chemical plant, versus renewable generation that might be waiting for transmission lines to be built? How do you balance kind of all those factors?
Yeah. It's a dance to make it all work, and I don't think anybody has found the perfect solution yet. Because that's exactly, do we transport the electrons or do we transport the hydrogen molecule? There is an electricity grid, but that's also struggles with congestion and where the industry sits is not where you have cheap power prices, is not where you can build the wind farm right next door. So there's a lot of modeling going on and trying to think through different scenarios. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Rohan Premagu. I'm a second-year MPP student specializing in energy policy and data analytics, and of course, I'm really interested in renewable energy.
So a few things. So one of the issues that I've read about with green hydrogen is the fact that like it's very energy intensive. Is RWE doing research on how to make the process itself a little bit more efficient? Also, of course, with renewable energies, there's the whole intermittency issue, and then battery storage, of course, gives a potential solution to that. What sort of work is RWE doing related to that? And then lastly, I read a few years ago there was a deposit of white hydrogen discovered in France, and scientists think that there may be more deposits elsewhere. How does that alter RWE's hydrogen strategy?
Yeah. Okay, wow, let me start in the beginning. Working backwards, was it white hydrogen and then energy costs?
White hydrogen, battery storage,
yeah.
and
okay.
Efficiency.
Yeah. Efficiency. So we don't produce electrolyzers, right? We work with, or we are in touch with a lot of electrolyzer manufacturers to understand their specifications and what would be the best product for what use case also. It depends on what happens with the hydrogen, at what pressure you need it, for what use case, which is the best electrolyzer solution. So we are following, how this industry evolves, and obviously efficiency is a big part of that. How we can influence efficiency is through power supply, right? Making the best combination of wind and solar assets to have the largest hour of production covered, where storage comes in. Storage could bridge the gaps, or some gaps at least. Storage is right now too expensive. Like the adding lithium-ion battery storage is more expensive than what you would get out of those additional run hours for the electrolyzer. Yeah, hopefully that changes, but that's currently the case. And then white hydrogen. Yes, it's a topic that we observe, right? That's like here and there are articles and reports coming out. There is this site in France. I think there are 1 or 2 sites in the US actually where that's being explored. My current understanding is that yes, there is a lot of hydrogen in the ground, but right now it's not extractable. If that becomes possible and we can just extract hydrogen like we do natural gas, well then I close my department and do something else. Because that would be much more efficient if you can do that actually in an efficient way, right? Where you get it out at a purity level that doesn't add a ton of cost to then separate it from other stuff. Yeah.
Actually, you had pink hydrogen on there, and I know that there's been some pilot projects looking into putting electrolyzers on your power plants, potentially for running some sort of industrial process on the site. Is RWE looking at partnering within nuclear power plants to site nearby?
Yeah. Right now we are not. I know of some other hydrogen projects that have done that and work with nuclear power plant producers. It's unclear at the moment if the tax credit will be eligible for nuclear power. I think the main reason is this additionality criteria where they ask for any power source that is for electrolysis production to be new and not kind of claim renewable energy that's already in the grid, and then you make the grid dirtier. But it's under consideration because the nuclear plants often don't run at full capacity, so could they use that extra power to run an electrolyzer? I think it's an option that we do that in the future, but right now we're not. Yeah. All right. Thank you very much.